Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR FM 89.
Hello and welcome to Arkansas Week. I'm Christina Munoz. The Arkansas legislature wrapped up the special session on Thursday, sending legislation on tax cuts and funding for a school safety grant program to the governor's desk for signage. Though the $500 million tax cut package sailed through with overwhelming support, it did not come without opposition from several legislative Democrats, as well as an attempt to extend the session to consider teacher salary increases, which the governor had previously removed from the agenda. Joining us today to provide a recap of the session and what the tax cuts mean for Arkansans are Michael Hibblen, the news director for KUAR Radio, Dr. Heather Yates, associate professor of political science at UCA, and Andrew DeMillo, Little Rock Capitol correspondent of the Associated Press. I first want to say thank you to all three of you for joining us here today. It's very good to have you here, so thank you for sharing your time. We appreciate it. Michael, I'm going to start with you. You got to be there for majority of this special session. It lasted about three and a half days. Tell us a little bit about the tax cuts, as far as that was kind of the reason, that was the purpose. We all knew this was coming, but fill us in as much as you can on what that package looks like.
Well, this will be a package that provides overall a reduction of income tax rates. For individuals, it goes from 5.5% to 4.9%. That is retroactive to the beginning of the year. The top corporate tax rate goes from 5.9% to 5.3%. And at the governor's bill signing ceremony on Thursday, he called this a historic day. Said when he came into office, the tax rate was at 7%, the highest it's ever been, and he's bringing it down to 4.9%, which is the lowest it's ever been. He provided a little bit of a history lesson, said the state income tax was first introduced in Arkansas in 1929. At that time, it was 5%, and he brought up the fact that during his inaugural address, he talked about the importance of bringing this down. And he also reflected on the fact that some of Arkansas's border states have no income tax. Tennessee and Texarkana, there was discussion about the differences between Texarkana, Arkansas, Texarkana, Texas, West Memphis, and Memphis. Said that this has been needed to help make the state more competitive.
Absolutely. I mean, understand that very well. And I want to go over to AP's Andrew DeMillo. Lots of talk about this surplus, $1.6 billion. That's a huge amount. Talk a little bit about why this was the desire out there to really get the money back to Arkansans.
Yeah, and this session wasn't announced until after the state had announced its surplus for the previous fiscal year, as you noted, $1.6 billion. And the governor had said that he wanted to return some of that money to taxpayers in some way, but also to address rising costs because of inflation. And this package of cuts, which was primarily the acceleration of those tax cuts, but also included some other items, including a temporary $150 tax credit for individuals making up to $87,000, and it basically saying that this. The surplus showed that the state can afford to do this, but also just with the costs going on right now, that really showed the motivation for doing this, and also that helped motivate the idea of this school safety grant program, tapping into the surplus for that $50 million program.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But first I want to go over to Dr. Yates and fill us in about the political side of this. Everyone likes to say, yay, money back in your pocket, this is good news. But in all politics, we know it's not always that easy. So kind of present to us the political side of how this went down.
Absolutely. So to give some context to what the special session meant was there was a staggering surplus in the state budget, $1.6 billion. I just have to articulate that because it is so large. And because of this surplus, it was directed to fund the tax relief and the one-time tax credits, but it was also politically a real missed opportunity by what was not on the agenda, and that's teacher pay. That has been in the cycles and at the top of a lot of people's mind. School is beginning to start, and this is also important for a couple of reasons. One, the governor did kind of telegraph and desire to address the teacher pay issue, but it ultimately was not a part of the agenda in the special session because the reason being given is that there isn't that support inside the legislature. However, they are also, and when I say they, the governor and the Republicans are saying they're not closing the door on teacher pay, but this is a classic example of kicking the can down the road. Here is the context. In January, the state legislative committees on education embarked on the adequacy study. And so the agenda issued by the adequacy study, they said that the legislators were going to review teacher pay in April. And so when a special session is called, the teachers rallied and said this is an excellent opportunity to redirect $1.6 billion surplus to elevate teacher pay. And the response to that was from the Republicans is like, well, we don't have enough information yet. We have to wait till the adequacy study is concluded, and the price tag is $333 million. And so the legislature, I think, really lost an opportunity. It is election cycle, and teachers are voters, and they camped out on the Capitol steps all week to present this issue and to be very visible. Now, the politics of this is that I'm not sure if voters are going to penalize the legislature for not addressing teacher pay. And by their actions in the special legislature, it goes to suggest that maybe not. Voters will not penalize the legislators for that. So this is in action. This is a moving issue, but it was also a real lost opportunity, and teachers are making sure the legislature hears that.
Absolutely, which is typically the case. There have been rallies, there's been social media outcries, a lot of talk about the teacher pay issue. So Michael, I want to go over to you, and you, as you've been covering this issue, what have you been hearing from teachers that are speaking out, as well as the politicians that are saying, well, we might have to wait on this?
Well, we did have teachers who were at the Capitol who were actually lined up along the stairs going up to the House chamber, trying to sway lawmakers. I asked the governor about this on Thursday at his after he signed the bills into law. I asked him, any regrets about this? Because, as you said, he had expressed some support for this, but said there was not support among legislative leaders right now, said we should wait for this adequacy study to be completed. But in the meantime, you've got a lot of teachers who are leaving the profession. The salary right now, minimum salary, $35,000. That doesn't go very far for, in most cases, people who are highly educated. So you do have a lot of people leaving right now. The governor said he is confident this will be brought up next year. But in the meantime, just like so many other industries, you have a lot of people who have decided to change professions, largely in some cases because of the salaries. So yes, we'll see what happens. I was talking with Jonathan Desmang, the senator from Beebe, as we were walking out of the Capitol on Thursday. He said he's confident it will be addressed next year, but just at this time, the governor had said when he issued the call, he wanted this to be quick, and apparently they did not want to delve into this at this time, which might have stretched out the session longer than the 3 days it was.
Absolutely, very good points. And Andrew DeMillo, I want to go over to you. One of the concerns that was expressed was that this is one-time money. Teacher salary is an ongoing, continual money. Is that, do you believe, one of the strongest arguments for not addressing it in this special session?
I think that was, one of the arguments you heard at first. But the argument that you started hearing more and more was the adequacy study. This study that the legislature is required to do to determine what constitutes an adequate education. It's used to make recommendations on school funding levels. And the argument that you started hearing more and more was special session is not the right time to do this because this study is still underway. and wait until January when we can, or when the legislature can take a closer look at this and can have more data to back up these numbers on what the salary amount is. I think given that argument, I think there is going to be a lot more pressure on the legislature next year, considering that they were pointing to it. And you really, for the most part, you heard most Republican leaders saying they think there will be some kind of raise for teachers. So there's going to be pressure to take some kind of action. And I think it'll be interesting this fall to see what the adequacy report says, because that's going to really kind of provide the backup for that.
Very good points. Well, thank you very much for that. So, Dr. Gates, I want to go back to you because you talked about missed opportunities. Another issue that was highly debated and very emotional was the possibility of, as some people see it, fixing the trigger law that went into effect regarding the Roe v. Wade announcement that came out earlier this year, that there is not any sort of legislation in our trigger law that allows for rape or incest. There had been some talk that this would have been a great opportunity to add that in at this time. That did not happen. What is your take on that side of the issue?
All that's correct, and another missed opportunity with amending the abortion legislation, because as it stands in Arkansas, there is a nearly universal ban, no questions, no exceptions, for life or health of the mother in the case of rape, incest, or a non-viable pregnancy. And this was the first legislative session opportunity to revisit that trigger law in the wake of the Kansas referendum. I think the Kansas referendum, where the residents went to the polls to defeat a constitutional amendment, really was resounding through the region, and it caught the legislature's attention. And this is where I think the Arkansas legislature took a look at the language of that bill and realized that there needs to be some sort of language, legal exception, medical language that affords the medical community. This is so much larger than just one person dealing with a pregnancy. This is also the medical community, because also what we're seeing in Texas is that there are medical professionals that are being extremely cautious because they don't want to, for the lack of a better term, trigger a prosecution under the law as it stands. And so this is where Arkansas is kind of at the crossroads, almost quite literally, regionally and geographically and politically. And so this was also another astounding lost opportunity where there were two Republicans, notable Republicans, who actually pushed the trigger law and were heavy opponents on it. They were the ones also wanting to support an extended legislative session to return to that language. And I think it's really important to emphasize that this is also language that would protect the medical community as well as private citizens.
So why, in your opinion, did it not get discussed here?
I think for the purpose that this is campaign season, and this is always an issue to campaign on. Abortion is a lightning rod to pull from the Kansas example. Again, it will mobilize voters. And so by not putting it on the table to augment that language, it is a campaign issue. It's a campaign issue to stand on principles. Arkansas is a very rural state, and in rural communities in Arkansas, it didn't play out such the same way in Kansas, but in Arkansas, the issue of abortion is a very dichotomous abortion. You're either for it or you're against it. It's black or white. There's very few discussions on the gray area. So it circles back around to, and I'll pull teacher pay into this as well. This is campaign season. and when I say missed opportunities legislatively, I'm also speaking very specifically to lost opportunities on campaigning. This was some two issues that voters will mobilize around. It just was, which direction will they mobilize in?
Very interesting. Like you said, it always seems to go back to politics, especially if there's an election around the corner. Before we wrap up, Andrew, I want to go back over to you to talk about something that was also passed, and it's the money for school safety. Explain how much it is and how this is going to work.
Yeah, so it's a $50 million grant program. The governor had proposed this after the Uvalde school shooting, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. And the legislation itself is very general, basically just sets this money aside. There's still a lot of details that are going to have to be hashed out through the rulemaking process. We don't know how the money is going to be divided, what it's going to have to go toward. Part of the discussion is that this will help implement some of the recommendations from the School Safety Commission that was reinstated after the Uvalde shooting. So yeah, I think this fall we will get a better idea of what exactly the mechanics of this. What will this fund? What types of things? What qualifications are our districts going to have, the process for it. But there's still the mechanics and the details are still have to be hashed out.
Absolutely. And going back to the tax issue, because I know that people are listening, always want to know, how do we get the money? How does this play out? Is it a check in the mail? Is it your taxes? Is it retroactive to the beginning of this year?
Retroactive to the beginning of the year, at least for the tax income part. And then it's a tax credit for the $150 for individuals or up to $300 for married couples filing jointly.
And so as you do your taxes, this is when you're going to see that impact on your taxes when you file them next year.
Right. It won't be like a check like we did with the federal stimulus dollars.
Right. So don't be looking for your mailbox waiting for the checks, but it will be in your pockets when you do your taxes, and they're hoping that that money can help the economy. And Dr. Yates, do you see us being in this position again? I want to emphasize you use the word B for billion is with the B, not million. It's a huge dollar amount. What do you anticipate the surplus, if there is one, in the future?
Well, based on all the reports that we've been able to ascertain is that when the surplus is used to fund tax relief, that actually reduces the amount of income into the state. And so we are looking at a future projection of reduced income. And when we look at reduced income, circle back around to teacher pay and circle back around to public education, right? That makes some of those contingencies, some of those portions of the electorate a little nervous, because it's what will the future surplus, if there is one available, what does that look like? Where we sit today, that projected surplus is significantly reduced.
And I guess that's part of why so many people wanted some of these issues pressed, because they are concerned that there could be a change in the future.
Fiscally, it was a lost opportunity.
I think we've said that several times here. Andrew, before we go, when you look into your crystal ball and see the session coming forward, what do you anticipate being the biggest issues debated in the session?
Next year we're going to have a new governor. And based on the polling right now, Sarah Sanders is still, very much favored in that race, and she hasn't gone into a lot of details on things, but we have kind of a general idea of some of the things she wants to do. One of the big things is she wants to do even more income tax cuts. So I think we're going to see a lot more discussion on that, as well as, how do you fund some of these other things that people want to do while cutting income taxes? And beyond that, I think we're going to see some of the same social issues that we saw really tie up the legislature in the past couple years. We've heard, even though with the Dobbs decision, there's still going to be some follow-up discussion on abortion and additional restrictions kind of dealing with that issue, even with the trigger ban. There's been discussion on things like how race is taught in schools. So I think we're going to see, we're already getting an idea of a lot of these issues, but the income tax debate is still going to be a pretty big one.
Absolutely. Very well said, and things we will all be continuing to follow for sure. Well, we no doubt have the best of the best from the AP, from KUAR, and from UCA. So I want to say thank you to all three of you for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very much appreciated. Coming up, we take a look at urban farming on this month's Good Roots.
Major funding for Good Roots is provided by Arkansas Farm Bureau.
Arkansas Farm Bureau, advocating the interests of Arkansas's largest industry for more than 80 years. Arkansas counts on agriculture. Agriculture counts on Farm Bureau.
Additional funding for Good Roots provided by the Union Pacific Foundation.
Chick-chicks! 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 Chick-chick-chick-chicks! Yeah, I know it's morning. And I have some goodies for you. There you go. If I had to put it any way at all, I would say my passion, my gift is helping people connect to their food. and it's through heritage. So when I designed Urbana Farmstead, I wanted to incorporate all aspects, from the planting to the harvesting to the distribution. That's what you have here. So urban farm that has the farm, and then the market, and then also the kitchen. It's all part of one farmstead, which is really important, because if you're at home and it's a homestead, that's what you would be doing. When I plant something, I have in mind, what am I going to do with it afterwards? And I try to do 40 to 50% of everything I grow that I actually sell inside the market. The whole property is 1 acre, but we're actually only farming on less than 1/4. We have a pretty good high yield because we're using the space wisely. We do everything vertical. So vertical gardening is where you plant in the ground, or in our case, we're using 5-gallon buckets in some of our planting, and you remove the leaves going up the stem, which forces and causes that plant to grow up. And then you stabilize it with a string, and so you have really less ground you're using, but also it keeps away the bugs, it helps you for watering. So there's a lot of really good reasons why you want to do vertical farming. I think it's important for all of us to know, again, more about our own self and how do we feed not just our bodies, but our souls. So this is part of what I'm doing here. I'm feeding my body, but I'm also feeding my soul. And I try to share that. There's so many people come to my market and they'll walk around my farm and they'll say, wow, I wish I could do this. And I'm like, you can. You can have an entire herb garden in one little pot. You can have a tomato. You can have a cucumber. You can grow things if you want to in your apartment, on your balcony, on a patio. It's very possible to do that. Economically, it's really important for people to grow their own food. Second of all, there's just nothing from a taste perspective. A tomato in a garden that you pick off that vine tastes like a tomato, smells like a tomato, and of course looks like a tomato. Some of the things you buy in a grocery store, they've had to pick them so green that they don't smell or taste like whatever they were supposed to be. So here on the property, you can buy it fresh. You can buy it already canned, which I do for you, or you can come and learn how to can yourself in my canning club. If you want, you can come and learn how to cook it into Parmesan or whatever, because I have cooking classes as well. In addition, I'm trying to teach people value add, which is the preservation piece of it. So I take things in, so the cucumber is an example, and I take it in and I preserve it by making pickles, but I also make relish. But I also use that so I can add that to other things and make a chutney. So you can use those things by creating multiple things out of that one cucumber. It all roots back to Italy. Both my mom and my dad's family are from Italy, Sicily and then Naples. And then they eventually moved to the south part of LA, where I actually grew up. We lived in an urban community with a very small house, and they ripped out the lawns and they planted in this urban house our gardens. So we lived like this. We lived sustainably. Everybody did something. You always learned how to plant and, of course, harvest, and you'd learn how to pluck a chicken so you could have the chicken. We raised rabbits for food. We absolutely did those things, and I learned a lot of it from that. But then the real training came when I went and lived abroad. I went to Italy and the southern part of Spain for 18 months, and I lived with families. And I did this farm away program where I was working in the field for 6 hours, and then I worked in the kitchen for 6 hours. And that's where I really learned the technique, because I learned some things as a child, but this is where it really came into practice. I decided I wanted to go back to Italy and to discover more about my roots. It was really great to be able to see myself and to, look at things that were happening in my life and to say, this makes sense now. I jumped from the farming world of, just trying to live as a poor family, and then I went off and got my education and I went into high tech. Even when I was doing that job, I was always looking for an opportunity to go and take cooking classes and learn other new cuisines. During 9/11, there were a lot of major things that happened to the world, and me personally as well. I had a ticket in my possession where I was supposed to be on the plane that took themselves down. And I decided at the very last minute that to not go on that trip. I was saying, what would life look like now? What should it look like? What does it need to be to fill my soul? One of my friends said, why don't you go check out Arkansas? It's exactly what you're looking for. So I took a car and I actually went through the Boston Mountains and the Ozarks, and I spent a weekend and I fell in love. I said, this is exactly where I want to be. I felt like, hey, I can do this because I've learned the techniques while I was in Italy, and I lived the experience of doing urban farming as a child, and that's what Urbana Farmstead is. Urbana for urban, and then Farmstead is a place where you can grow everything you need to live sustainably. That's where I'm at in my life, is to give back, show people how to use this wonderful produce that they can grow in their yard, or that I'm growing, either one, and just change their lives a little bit.
And a big thank you to Margie Raimondo for sharing her passion to inform and teach others about urban farming. That concludes this edition of Arkansas Week. We'll see you next time.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR FM 89.